Howdy, Jacob here. Today we're going to do a video. It's a little bit different than usual. I have just pulled the Mag7 companies and have done a stock price analysis on them. Foreshadowing, nothing looks super pretty. But again, that's not going to stop me from dollar cost averaging into mutual funds and ETFs. So to just go around and introduce this video, I'm just going to go over my analysis of the Magnificent Seven, which is Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, Meta, Tesla, and Nvidia. Go over my assumptions and then the price point that gets me the return I'm looking for, and then the return that I think it'll have roughly right now, based on what the current stock price is. So the first look we have is Apple. Apple is very likely going to be the more slower growth of the seven over the perspective, next 7 years where I do this analysis. And that's just because it's kind of already ingrained in so many people's lives. So really is everything, but also their business that they run is, at least now, less on the service side. It's definitely growing in that service. Revenue growing double digits year over year is fantastic. That's going to help their margins. That's going to help their revenue growth as that becomes a bigger pie. But for now, I think that if I were to look at the next 7 years, it's probably going to have the lowest of growth over the seven. However, with that said, although it has lower growth, I think it has the most dominant moat, as Warren Buffett has said, where if you would decide between your iPhone or a car for the next year, most people would choose the iPhone. And so that's kind of his logic around it. And so I do think it's a great company, but I think 7% growth, higher margins than it's really ever had, 3% buybacks, 22 on the PE, price to free cash flow. I'm saying it needs to fall to roughly in half, to about 115 or so, to get the return I'm looking for here. Again, that's why these really big companies, it's hard to find them at prices that really make sense to you. In my few years of being, doing analyses on companies, only two of the Mag 7 have ever fallen into a price that I found attractive and bought into. That was Google and Meta. Um, but outside of that, the only ownership I have of the other five, or all seven, um, are really just going to be my investments into the S&P 500 through my retirement funds and all that, retirement accounts and all that. Okay, so Apple looks to me to be a little bit overpriced based on my analysis and based on the return I want. If we want a 5% return, if we want a 4% return, we're pretty much there. So 4% a year for the next 7 years. Um, Based on my assumptions of revenue growth, margin, share change, P, that's where I think Apple is right now. So could it go down, 5% a year over the next 7 years? Yeah. Could it go up 40% a year for the next 7 years? Absolutely. This is just based on my assumptions and where I would view the company to go over the next couple of years. And so the next couple will be a little bit faster since I've already gone through a bit of the review process. So Microsoft, higher margins by a little bit compared to Apple. They don't buy back as many shares, but they do have a bigger dividend, and their margins, I think, can expand larger than Apple's. But even still, it looks to be almost double from what the price point I'm looking at. So again, about 4% a year, 4 to 5% a year, given these assumptions over the next 7 years. Again, that's just my analysis. If it were to fall in half, obviously I'd presume 15% a year for the next 7 years. And so price is incredibly important when it comes to purchasing equity and the price that you pay. So for Amazon, similar story. I don't think it's going to grow quite as much, similar to an Apple, because they are the two largest. So Amazon currently does $620 billion in revenue. They do have the smallest margins because, again, they're in the more consumables industry of selling products. And when you have shipping and all that, it's hard to make a large margin. But really, in my eyes, the play here would be Amazon could double their prices on everything tomorrow and maybe lose max 5% of membership. And so to me, that's kind of the investment play here. So I think They haven't produced 10 or 12 margin in the past, but I think they could easily do that given that, no one would leave their services if they were to do that. But even still, based on the current price today, you're probably looking at about 2% return based on my assumptions. Again, Amazon's done some crazy things over the last 20 years. And this, I would probably said all throughout that time, you're going to get single digit returns, nothing impressive. And again, that's okay. It's okay to be wrong through not investing because you didn't lose anything. It's way worse to think that you're absolutely right, go all in on something and be wrong. It's, it, I feel I don't feel bad at all just being a bystander on something that's gone up a lot. So don't have FOMO. Um, anyways, Google is a stock that I currently have in my portfolio. One of the 7 that I currently do still have. And obviously, again, like I said, I have everything in mutual funds through my retirement accounts and all that. But through individual stock companies, this is one that I own. And I was able to buy it when it got below 90. Sadly, that's the only time I did buy. So again, I'm a very conservative guy. So a lot of the time, I'm not gonna, especially with these larger companies, I'm gonna think that there's other opportunities elsewhere. But anyways, it's gone up quite a bit at this time. It's about $200 a share. I think, based on my analysis, I'd probably get in around 120 again, and I'm saying it would probably have close to a 6% return a year for the next 7 years given this, if you buy it today, given the current stock price and where I think it's going to go based on revenue growth, margins, share change, and a 21 PE. Meta, similar story. I got in. This is the second stock that I got into individually, but sold out pretty early on, probably around 350, 400 or so, because that was before I watched Mohnish Pabrai go over really the only time you should sell a great business is if it's egregiously overpriced. And for me, when I was doing my analysis, I was getting about 5% a year for the next couple years because their AI wasn't super popular. Just some things were very dampened at that time. But right now, I think it's definitely on the overpriced side, in my perspective. And I think that, the next couple years, maybe 2% a year for the next 7 years, who knows? Again, I'm just saying my analysis. Second to last stock, Tesla, growth of the business, I'm saying 15%. Again, that puts them at $260 billion in the end of 7 years. I think that's very high. I think these margins are very high, 12 and 10% for a car business. I think majority of their business is cars. And well, it's a fact. Majority of their business is cars, so it's a car business, but they do run services similar to Amazon. You'd say Amazon is maybe a logistics company, similar to a Walmart or a Target or whatever, but they do other things on the side that do inflate that margin. And we do see that here. But even still, um, I would definitely want a bigger return since the car industry in whole is not something that's super attractive and services are going up, but not as much and the margins aren't as crazy as some of the other businesses in this Mag7. So right now, I mean, I would think this to be the most expensive company to me at this price point. But again, I've been wrong so many times on Tesla, but I don't feel bad at all because I'm just missing out on something, and I have zero FOMO. And so, congrats if you think that that's a fantastic buy at this price. Based on my analysis, I'm a very fundamental investor, I like to think, and based on my fundamentals, I just don't see it being at that price that makes sense to me. Last one, Nvidia, high growth, crazy growth. I think you're going to have the greatest growth year of anything else since these chips are growing like wildfire. I think it's hilarious that their free cash flow and earnings were greater than their revenue from, maybe even just 2 years ago or so. And so, can they keep these margins? Will the chips for AI create some competition? I mean, that's just basic economics to me. When something is super high flying, has great margins, that's just a consumeristic world where another company is going to come in, deflate those prices, and create competition. Do they have such a dominance right now that I think they're going to be the dominant force still? Absolutely. But, that's why I still think 35 and 40% margin is crazy. But with these assumptions, I think you'll get around a 5% return. So That's my analysis of the Mag 7. None looked crazy right now, attractive, but hope you enjoy the video. Thank you.